Well, good morning and welcome to Elevenses. It's Sunday, 21st of May. It's show number 335, and this one is pre-recorded about 2 hours earlier than normal, as it's a lovely sunny day out there today in northwest London. I'm headed out towards Ely to go to a classic motorcycle event and to look round a steam pumping museum that helped drain the Fens. So I'll report on that in a future show. But for now, as I say, the show is going out recorded. So I won't be able to answer any questions as the show goes on, as I would normally do. But do drop me a line if you do have any comments, any questions, and I will get back to you when I get home later this evening. So that's what today's show is. It's a recording. Now, what have we got for you in today's news? Well, we have a whole bunch of stories actually. As usual, we've got the news that 1 in 5 DOT certified helmets in America is actually that's not what I wanted to put up. Just a moment. I got the that was what I was trying to show you. 1 in 5 DOT certificated helmets in the US retrospectively fails testing, which is absolutely appalling. We'll also be looking at the Competition and Markets Authority, which is investigating supermarket fuel prices here in the UK. Yet another motorcycle's been crushed after the police stopped a rider who was uninsured, unlicensed and unhelmeted. I'm always amazed at how hard some people go to attract police attention. The big four Japanese manufacturers have all announced that they are to collaborate on small hydrogen engines. We'll have a look at that particular story briefly. KTM, they're looking to extend their holding in MV Agusta. Royal Enfield is getting a capital injection from their parent company, which is Pira Industry out in India. Simplify and add lightness, KTM's 390 Adventure. I think that bike follows Colin Chapman's rule. And we'll also have a look at the Yadia Keenness. I presume that's how it's pronounced, Keenness or Keenness. It's likely coming to Europe at the end of the year. Sadly, no bikes will be on the show at the Brighton Speed Trial later this spring, an event I've never actually managed to get to watch actually. And then we'll come back to helmets at the end of the show. I'll be looking at those. Today's discussion point is the statement helmets cause neck injury. That is actually a myth and it has been firmly debunked by some latest research. So settle yourselves down for the next few minutes whilst we crack on with all those stories. So, right, let's start with the first one then, and this is the DOT helmet, and this is the news that 1 in 5 helmets which has a DOT certification for sale in the US, and it's also accepted in a number of other countries, they retrospectively fail testing, and that's a very alarming report on the ultimatemotorcycling.com website. Now here's the problem as reported by the site. What they say is the US Department of Transport, DOT, and the National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, that's the NHTSA, they are tasked with monitoring compliance of standards for crash helmets sold in the US for on-road motorcycle use. Now, all those must meet the specific performance standards as laid down in the Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standard 218. So that's FMVSS 218, which you can see there on the label. If I zoom in on that, you can see a little bit more clearly. That is the standard. This is all done through ACT Laboratories, which is apparently an independent testing company, who have a contract with the NHTSA to test the helmets. So as you can see, examples of helmets which are then selected by the NHTSA with this marking on them, this standard, are purchased from retailers for testing. So the thing is that the helmets that they actually test and are found retrospectively to fail the test are actually already on the market. and it's that already on the market issue, which is really scary. Now, if you follow me regularly, you'll know that I talk about MotoCap and their clothing standards checked fairly regularly. But the thing is, for the Australia and New Zealand, there is no standard for motorcycle clothing. So what they're doing there is they're retrospectively testing what's on sale, but it gives you an idea of how well it actually performs. The ToT test is on a helmet standard which helmets should comply to and which they don't comply to. So the ToT standard has already come under fire because its requirements are for impact absorption are considerably lower than the ECE standard, for example, which we have here in Europe, or indeed the independent Snow Labs testing, which is also carried out in America, which is often claimed to be the toughest in the world. But I had no idea that it allowed helmet manufacturers to self-certificate. So as the article goes on to state, self-certification is allowed, for example, under ECE rules, but only on certain products that are not considered high risk, and helmets are not in that category. And the number of helmets that they test is actually quite low. They're just 11 were tested in 2022. So it's not clear though whether that's absolute numbers or whether they repeat the test with several helmets, for example, from a single model range. I don't know. But it does leave me wondering how many other totally untested model ranges that there are on sale to US bikers. And what's worse really is that of the 228 helmets investigated since 2014, 132 failed testing, 87 failed on their safety performance, so in other words in the impact tests, 45 have failed on the labelling. How can you get your labelling wrong, honestly? But just 14 of these helmets were actually recalled. And then there are cheap helmets which are being sold over the internet and that you can buy quite openly on various sites, auction sites, and they won't come with any certification, of course. So what do riders do? Well, you can buy stickers like these. They're clearly fake, but all too often riders will use something like this to stick on a cheap helmet that they bought from China, which is illegal for use on the roads in any case, and basically you attempt to cover up the fact they're using an illegal helmet. The land of the free, eh? Now, advice to US bikers is to check the helmet has earned one of the alternative certifications, which includes, they suggest, the ECE standard. This is ultimatemotorcycling.com speaking, the FIM standard, and or the Snell Foundation's independent test standard. But most importantly, they say stick to helmets manufactured by reputable companies. So I'll be coming back to helmets at the end of the show, by the way, talking about the problems of identifying no-name brands, but also to look at the aspect of whether helmet wearers have a higher risk of neck injuries. That's something anti-helmet campaigners have claimed for decades. So come back at the end of the show, or make sure you stay to the end of the show, I should say, and we'll be looking at that in a little bit more detail. Right, okay, so on with the news. Here in the UK, the Competition and Markets Authority is looking at whether supermarkets have been overcharging for fuel at the pumps. Now, supermarkets have repeatedly claimed that they have been working to keep food prices as low as possible, but an investigation into the fuel market, which has already started actually, has found that some supermarkets have increased the margins on petrol and diesel. The CMA said the evidence suggested that at least one supermarket had set a higher target for its margin on fuel prices in 2022, which could have led to rivals following suit and raising prices too. Now, Asda, who are nearly always the cheapest of the supermarkets for fuel by my observation, said it would work in full cooperation with the CMA and added it was focused on providing customers with the best value at the pumps. Now, the CMA noted that whilst the Russian invasion of the Ukraine had caused prices to rise, higher pump costs could not be attributed solely to factors outside the control of the retailers. and it said that the higher prices at the pumps appeared to be in part due to, quote, some weakening of competition in the UK fuel market, but that so-called rocket and feather pricing happened during 2022. Wonderful expression. I've never heard that one before, but basically what it means is that when prices rise, they are passed on instantly to the customer, but when reductions in wholesale prices happen, when those prices fall, the reduction at the pump isn't in line with those reducing prices. So basically the seller, the retailer, gets a sort of cushion on their sales and makes some added profit as the prices drop back again. Now, a review of the fuel market has been ongoing apparently for several months over some initial concerns that retailers and forecourts were failing to pass on a 5p duty cut from the government to motorists. Now, I've certainly reported several times on the show over the last year or so that the cheapest petrol locally is actually being sold by a couple of independent filling stations. And the other thing I've noticed is that the price of petrol here in London is significantly higher than many other parts of the country. You know, I was out in the middle of Yorkshire, in the middle of nowhere, filled up at a little petrol station because I was running short on petrol, and that fuel was around 5 pence per litre cheaper than the local Asda supermarket here in London. So there are big disparities in how fuel is charged, and certainly I think that the investigation should certainly push supermarkets a bit harder to reduce their fuel prices. Right, okay, now I guess I should never be entirely surprised at the lengths that some people go to attract police attention, but for instance this teenager here was caught out on his bike, and the bike was firstly unregistered, which obviously would tend to attract the attention of a policeman, but when he was stopped he also was wearing no helmet, and having attempted to evade the police first and then making off on foot, he was nabbed. He was found to have no licence and no insurance either, of course. So he has been charged with those offences, and the bike was actually seized and it's been sent to the crusher. Now this happened in the Derbyshire town of Heanor. This was last Sunday, May the 14th. And that was officers from the Heanor Safe Neighbourhood Team and Derbyshire Police Off-Road Bike Team, and they were out targeting antisocial bikers, which I'm afraid is happening all too often these days. The team said they also engaged with other bikers throughout the day as we patrolled hotspots in the area, giving advice on where they can legally go off-road and about bike safety. Now, okay, don't forget, if you do enjoy the show, why not follow me on on Facebook, or you can subscribe to my YouTube channel. You'll find these shows all indexed neatly in the Elevenses channel over on my YouTube page. What was else was I going to say? There's also a brand new series of short videos over there on the science as well of biking, so do pop over to YouTube and check that out. Somewhere there was supposed to be a link somewhere, but I seem to have mislaid that. Alright, never mind. So, alright, with the clock ticking on ICE engines powered by petroleum products, the pro-hydrogen lobby have been given something of a boost by the news this week that the Japanese four, Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki and Suzuki, have just announced that they are collaborating on small hydrogen-powered engines. Now, they have received what's called ministerial approval to form a technological research association called HYSE, Hydrogen Small Mobility and Engine Technology. HIS, presumably you pronounce that, I don't know, for developing hydrogen-powered engines for what is being described as small mobility. Now, the reason given is that if decarbonisation is to be achieved, there will be a need for a multi-pathway strategy to address various issues in the mobility sector, rather than, they say, focusing on a single energy source. Which is something ironic, of course, really, as virtually every vehicle out there on the roads is powered either by petrol or by diesel. There are, I suppose, very few vehicles with natural gas engines, and of course the growing number of electric vehicles too. So the new statement continues: against this backdrop, research and development targeted at commercialization of mobility with engines powered by hydrogen, deemed a next generation energy source, is gaining momentum. Amongst the technical challenges recognized in using hydrogen are unstable combustion and the limited fuel tank capacity for small mobility vehicles. Now, each of the companies will be undertaking a somewhat different research role. For example, Honda are apparently going to be researching the model-based development of hydrogen-powered engines. Yamaha will investigate the requirements for a hydrogen refueling system and hydrogen tanks for small mobility, and Kawasaki will look at the auxiliary equipment required for a fuel supply system and tanks, and the equipment installed between the fuel tank itself and the injector. Now, Kawasaki Heavy Industries and Toyota Motor Corporation will support the Association of Special Members, and Toyota, of course, has specific experience of designing hydrogen-powered vehicles, and Toyota also have very close links with Yamaha, of course. Now, Kenji Komatsu, he's the chairman nominee of HYSE, and the Executive Officer of Technical Research and Development Center of Yamaha Moto Co. Limited. He says that the group is committed to this endeavour with a sense of mission to preserve the use of internal combustion engines, which epitomise the long-term efforts of our predecessors. So, not too surprisingly, of course, some news outlets have promptly jumped on this as a sign that hydrogen is go for bikes, and one story in particular suggested that MotoGP will now be switching to hydrogen-powered engines. The fact is, of course, right now the series is actually looking to move towards e-fuels in their conventional engines. Now, the 5 MotoGP manufacturers, Honda, Yamaha, Ducati, Aprilia and KTM, are currently discussing future technical rules. The Premier class will use 40% synthetic fuel from 2024, and that will rise to 100% synthetic by 2027. But a switch to hydrogen, frankly, would entail some rather significant changes. So whether that'll happen or not, I have no idea. Now, several of the big names in racing are now speaking out against an electric future, including KTM and Triumph, who supply Moto2 engines, and also Ducati, who, rather ironically, of course, took over the provision of bikes for the Moto E World Championship, which is the electric World Championship, and that runs alongside some of this year's MotoGP events. Now, frankly, despite the speculation in the press that this interest in hydrogen in Japan could somehow change the direction of motorcycling in general away from electric bikes to hydrogen power, I think it's unlikely that hydrogen will come to mass market bikes, simply because of all the issues with providing sufficient quantities of clean hydrogen, because it has to come from non-petroleum sources, or you're simply shifting the problem of the pollution to another location. And then you've got to distribute it globally anyway. So you're going to need tankers shipping the stuff around from wherever it's manufactured. And this is one of the things that Japan is looking at the moment. That Australia will do the dirty work in refining coal and producing hydrogen from it, which will produce CO2 in Australia. But then the hydrogen will be shipped across the Pacific in special liquid hydrogen tankers and burned cleanly in Japan. So it's all fine for Japan, not so great for Australia. But of course, there are infrastructure problems with charging electric vehicles. We know that, and that's only going to get worse as more and more people adopt electric vehicles. But at the moment, there's virtually zero infrastructure for hydrogen fueling. So if e-fuels are likely to be niche because of the difficulties of producing those, I think the same will probably be the result of this interest in hydrogen. And according to Phuc Phar Yap, who is a director at Singapore's Nanyang Technical University's Transport Research Centre, he says that electrification of micro-mobility, i.e. small motorbikes, electric scooters, electric bicycles, etc., etc., it can be adopted at a faster pace than cars, mainly because the batteries and the motors are much smaller. And just to round the story off, there's even a rumour, unsubstantiated, I can't find anything else other than one statement, but it says that Toyota are set to announce an electric two-wheeler later this year. So if Toyota are looking at electric motorcycles, that could be quite interesting indeed. Anyway, moving on, if you don't want to play with the high voltage crowd, you can do something different, I suppose. And something that's being done is you can buy up all the ICE competition. In the hope, I guess, that some countries will keep burning gasoline for rather longer than Europe. So Pira Mobility, they're the company behind KTM, several other brands including Husqvarna. They now appear to have set their sights on the quasi-Italian brand MV Agusta. Now, last year, Pira Mobility bought a 25.1% stake in MV, and in a recent interview with Hubert Trunkenpolz, who is a member of the executive board of the group, he suggested that the Austrian company wants to increase its shareholdings in MV in the future. Now, after the share sales, MV Agusta CEO Timur Sadaro, now he officially terminated contracts with all MV's existing dealers, and he announced plans that now see all MVs being serviced at KTM dealerships with the spare parts supplied through the KTM network from Austria. Now, when asked last year if more of MV would be bought up by KTM, Sadarov added, the partnership has a lot of plans, and before we move to the next conversation, we need to work on the things that were already planned in our partnership agreement. Now, KTM would need to own 50.1% of the shares to take ownership of MV, but there are already concerns amongst the workforce that the production of MV Agusta motorcycles could be moved away from their long-time home, which is Chirana in Italy. Now, Pira deny that they would lay off employees and that any such move would never happen, but the group also own Husqvarna, and production of that formerly Swedish brand was shifted to Austria very soon after the company was acquired in 2013. But what is clear is that KTM see MV Agusta as underperforming. Last year, MV produced just 1,000 motorcycles, and Mr. Trunkenpolz said that MV's production plant should be producing 12 times that. So if it were to be brought within the Pira fold, MV Agusta would definitely give the group a manufacturer of premium priced motorcycles. So maybe that's what it's all about. Okay, at the other end of the spectrum, as you probably know, Royal Enfield motorcycles, they have a history spanning more than a century. The bikes were sold to India initially soon after the end of the Second World War, and when the Indian government started looking for a suitable motorcycle for police force and army use in 1955, it was the Bullet 350 that was chosen as most suitable for the job. So they put in an order for 800. Well, that was actually too many for the Redditch-based Royal Enfield company to cope with. So what they did was they partnered with a company called Madras Motors in India to form what was called Enfield India, to assemble the 350 Bullet under license in what is now Chennai. The tooling equipment for the production line was actually then sold to Enfield India in 1957, which allowed the company to go into full production of the 350 single. Now, with the consequent failure of the UK motorcycle industry, Enfield India continued to build the Bullet, and interestingly, through the 70s and 80s, they exported a few back to the UK. But in recent years, the range of Enfields has really undergone a transformation, and we now see they have a rapidly growing range of retro-styled machines, all with modern technology behind them. And Royal Enfield has actually become one of the fastest-growing motorcycle manufacturers in the world. Last year, the company actually set a record sales figure of over 800,000 two-wheelers. That's up 38 percentage points over the previous year's sales figures, which is huge growth. And on top of that, the Indian manufacturer also broke its own exports record, and more than 100,000 of those motorcycles were exported overseas. So, to continue to fuel the growth, Eicher Motors Limited, they are the company behind Royal Enfield. They recently announced that they are going to be investing around 121 million in the business in the 2024 financial year. So right now, what do we know about Royal Enfield? Well, we've seen that they are building on the 350 chassis. There's a new Himalayan coming out very soon. The 650 Twin, there are new models of that appearing very soon. There's also a new electric prototype under development. And with the continuing popularity of their ICE powered bikes, this cash will help Royal Enfield continue to develop their motorcycle range. So it's an astonishing growth story, really, I think. Now, if you do enjoy the show, don't forget you can pop over to my coffee page, and if you are kind enough to bung me a cuppa over there, you get access to hundreds of better biking articles. If you become a regular subscriber, then even more content is opened up for you. So just £3, just price for coffee, helps support me in continuing to make these shows for you, but also gives you huge benefits by popping over to coffee.com survival skills. Do go over there and have a look. There's plenty to read for free, and you'll see what is available for you over there. I'm sure you'll find something to read. Right, okay. So on with the next story then. Well, Colin Chapman of Lotus had a famous motto. It was simplify then add lightness. Now unfortunately it seems to be something that's forgotten in this particular age of motorcycling, when the UK's best-selling motorcycle is frequently BMW's R1250 GS. And Triumph think nothing of putting a sort of huge three-cylinder engine in a motorbike, and riders casually toss out a line about needing a 100 horsepower bike for a 20-minute commute. But occasionally there is a manufacturer who sees that cubes and kilos aren't the solution to everybody's riding desires, and KTM's baby 390 Adventure has actually garnered a firm fan base from those excuse me, who appreciate the simplicity and lightness of the little single cylinder. Now the mechanical specifications are pretty simple. It's got a 373 single cylinder liquid cooled 4-valve engine. The bike makes just 44 horsepower at 9,000 RPM, and 37 Newton meters of torque at around 7,000 RPM. That's probably more than the 650 Triumph did back in the 60s and 70s. But of course that the simplicity of the platform doesn't mean that KTM haven't thrown the electronic kitchen sink at the bike. So the new 2023 model, which has just appeared, comes with some updates. It gets ride-by-wire throttle, it gets traction control, it gets cornering ABS, it gets an off-road mode which allows more real wheel slip, and a linked off-road ABS setting that actually disengages the ABS on the rear brake, and it reduces its effect on the front brake. And you can fiddle with all that via a dedicated handlebar switch and see what you've just changed via a 5-inch colour TFT display. So result, well, basically adding all the extra bells and whistles, and of course taking into account inflation, the price has risen fairly significantly. It's gone up from £5,999 to £6,299. And if you want the option of spoked wheels, the SW model comes supposedly with tougher black anodized aluminium spoke wheels, a 19-inch front and 17-inch rear, and Continental TKC 70 tyres, and that pumps the price up again to £6,699. So it seems to be the way of things right now. Throw more technology at a bike and that helps you justify the bumped up price. So here's one where things are going slightly the other way. Let's just get that picture up on screen. There it is. It's the KTM 390 Adventure X. Now it looks identical, of course, to the previous models. but it's said to be budget friendly and more accessible, a version of the 390 Adventure range. Now, how have they managed that? Well, the answer is they've essentially done a Colin Chapman. They've simplified it and added lightness. Now, the bike goes back to basics, so rather than get a Bluetooth enabled color TFT display, which you now get on the standard 390 Adventure, it's a basic LCD screen. And almost all the electronic rider aids are stripped out too. The 390 Adventure X just gets the dual channel ABS, and you do get the off-road mode with it, and the ride-by-wire throttle, but all the other clever bits are basically removed. And the result is that out in India it's on sale at a significantly reduced price over the other models. Now, will we see it in the UK? I don't know. There's no word on that yet, but it would be nice if we did, wouldn't it? Budget model to get people into biking rather than trying to empty the wallet of those who've already into biking. Now, Yadia. They're another Chinese two-wheeler specialist. They have acclaimed 60 million customers in all parts of the world. But they've actually been in the business of producing electric two-wheelers for more than 20 years, which puts them well ahead of the game compared with many of the builders of electric motorbikes. Now, China has had some fairly strict emission rules in some of its big cities for a while, which accounts for the interest in electric motorcycles, which were developed primarily for commuting use. And in 2022 alone, just to give you an idea of the scale of the business, they made 14 million two-wheelers. Now, I've just given you a figure for Royal Enfield, which was 800,000. So an order of magnitude bigger again. And they've been the leading manufacturer of electric two-wheelers in terms of volume for 6 years. Now, Yadia plan to launch an electric motorcycle not just in Austria but also in Europe. So let's have a quick look at it. Here it is. It is the Yadia Keenness, possibly Keenness, I don't know, there's only one N in it. Anyway, it's due to arrive in Europe before the end of the year. Now, in performance, it's said to be similar to that of a sort of 125cc ICE powered motorcycle. You get a mid-mounted electric motor, so not in the rear wheel, which a lot of the cheaper ones do. And you get a chain drive to the rear. Shame it's not a belt, but hey ho. The motor is rated for a 5.5 kilowatt nominal power output, but up to 10 kilowatts max, which is around 13 horsepower, and that is capable of pushing the bike to a top speed said to be somewhere north of 60 miles per hour. So again, very similar performance to a petrol engine 125. But the usual point applies. Because the electric motor doesn't have to build to peak power like an ICE, it should be much nippier, especially off the line in town traffic. The bike gets an inverted front fork, as you can see, preload adjustable monoshock at the rear, and the motor can recover energy via regenerative braking. But just to back that up, you also get a pair of discs front and rear, and you get 180 and a 130/70 combination of tyres on the 17-inch wheels. The interesting thing is the batteries. If I can get the picture of the batteries. Oh, that's not the battery, that's a helmet. What's happened to the picture of the batteries? There it is. So it gets two of these. You can see them sitting next to each other under the seat, and as you can also see, they are removable with a carry handle. So you get a total capacity of 14.6 kilowatt hours, which is said to be capable of providing up to 140 kilometers or 88 miles of range on a single charge. Now, that will be a city range at low speeds. If the bike's 60 mile per hour performance is used out of town, expect that to drop dramatically. But if you compare that with the Honda that I was talking about last week, the scooter, which uses their own drop-in battery pack, which has a miserable range of about 18 miles, you can see that the Yadia actually offers you not only a much quicker bike, but obviously much more range as well. The Asian launch is due in July, a couple of months' time, and the bike is expected in Europe before the end of the year, and it's anticipated to be priced at around €7,000. So that's just around a little bit more than £6,000 at current exchange rates, which is a pretty attractive price point when you start looking at the prices of something like an R125 or an MT125. Okay, I'm running on a bit actually today, so I'm just going to skip the well, no, I'll just mention it very quickly. Brighton Speed Trials, unfortunately, is it normally would have motorcycles, but unfortunately the event was cancelled in 2020, 2021 due to COVID. Last year, 2022, motorcycles were missing altogether due to safety concerns over the surface and the roadside furniture, and unfortunately the Vintage Motorcycle Club, who organised the motorcycle side of the sprint, have decided that as the council haven't actually made any changes to the road layout, it's too dangerous once again for bikes to compete. And it seems that it's the improvements that the council have made for pedestrians and cyclists, which just the VMCC think it's too dangerous. So that's probably another sporting event that we're not going to see again for bikes, which is a bit of a shame, really. Right. So anyway, back to the helmets, which I was talking about now. Would you buy a helmet called a Targo Frog? Possibly not. As you can see, it's marketed here in the UK by Oxford. That is the Targo Frog, and you can see the graphic sort of pink frog. Well, probably not. I probably wouldn't be caught buying one of those. But anyway, whether it is your choice of a helmet or not, I hadn't actually heard of MT helmets, so I had a look to see where they're made, and in fact it stands for manufacturers Thomas. They're produced by what's called the largest helmet company in Spain, established in 1968 in Cartagena. Now they operate in more than 80 countries worldwide. They sponsor a number of Moto2 and Moto3 riders, including the 2021 Moto3 champion Pedro Acosta. And out in the US, just in case you're interested, they do have dual ECE and DOT certification. Now, I'm not sure if they're actually made in Spain. I did spot that they have a manufacturing plant in India, so perhaps they're all made out there. But anyway, MT Frog aside, it also happens that they got a message asking about the shape of modern helmets, and somebody produced a link to this particular AGV. It's a K6 hyphen, and Adrian wrote to me, I noticed that it sort of slopes upwards at the back. I seem to remember that back in the day helmets came right down at the back. Is it the case that the thinking now is that the old style could damage the spine in an accident? Well, it's an interesting question, and the sort of changes in design of helmets has crossed my mind a few times. They've definitely changed shape. Something that you'll notice is that they kind of have a bit of a sort of raised section over the shoulders, and this apparently is to help protect the collarbone, so when your head rolls sideways the helmet doesn't break your collarbone. But they are also built lower at the front. You get much more chin protection, and they are rather higher at the back. If you actually look at the design changes between that helmet and this helmet, this actually happens to be a Shoei S20. It was a mid-1970s helmet, and actually the very first lid I ever bought. And you'll notice that it's very round. And that's something that seems to have changed, is that the helmets are a very different shape, and that's partly, I think, the kind of tail that you get on these helmets is partly for aerodynamics. So one of the things I can tell you from my ecology courses is that when a wind passes over a cylindrical object, or in this case a more spherical object, the vortices are created, and what happens is they spin off first on one side and then on the other. And what we feel as we're riding along on the bike is that we feel these vortices as turbulence. And what happens is the the spinning vortex is first on one side, then on the other. And what it does is it causes the head to rock from side to side. It also creates a lot of drag. So that's sort of, you need a strong neck at speed. So I've certainly felt that with some older lids. So going back to that helmet there, you'll see that it actually has that little tail. But that tail's over the rear vent in the helmet. If you look again, you'll see that there is actually a bit of a grill there, and that will be to help draw air through the helmet. There will be a low pressure zone at the back of the helmet, and so what happens is the air actually gets sucked through the vent. It's not pushed into the vent, it's actually sucked through from the front of the helmet. So yes, helmets have improved dramatically since the days of my old showy helmet. But one thing that's not changed is the belief in certain elements of the riding population that motorcycle helmets exacerbate neck injury risks, specifically in the cervical C-spine area, by causing a neck fracture. But the studies show that that thinking simply doesn't hold up when the results of bike crashes are looked at. Now, while I was digging around thinking about this question, I found a study, recent one, by researchers at the University of Wisconsin School of Medicine and Public Health, and they just showed that the belief that helmets actually cause injuries is not just inaccurate. The risk of C-spine injuries from not wearing helmets is actually significantly worse. It's actually double the rate for C-spine injuries to riders who were wearing a helmet. Now, the study actually looked at 1,061 motorcycle crash victims who were treated at the university's Level 1 Trauma Centre from January the 1st, 2010 to January the 1st, 2015. So not cutting edge helmets, but certainly the more modern style of helmet. And of those motorcycle crash victims, 323 were not wearing a helmet at the time of their crashes, since helmets are not required for all riders in Wisconsin. And the study found that neck injuries occurred in 15.4% of the riders not wearing a helmet, whilst the rate was only 7.4% for riders who were wearing a helmet. So it's about half the rate of neck injuries if you choose to wear a helmet. Now, worse, the most severe type of neck injury, the spinal fracture, happened among riders not wearing a helmet at a rate more than twice that for riders who were wearing a helmet. 10.8% of crash victims minus helmet suffered a fractured spine, and it was just 4.6% of riders with helmets. The study also found that ligament injuries to the neck were more common amongst riders without helmets. So the studies basically, the results support the fact that helmets are not only proven to decrease the severity of traumatic brain injury, or even prevent it altogether, depending on the nature of the crash. The argument that helmet use produces an increased risk of neck injury simply doesn't hold up when the results of wearing helmets and not wearing helmets out on the streets is actually looked at. So helmets aren't going to make riders invulnerable, that's not possible, but they do make many head injuries survivable by either preventing the sort of cranial injuries, and they also, it seems, reduce the potential for serious neck injuries too. So good news for helmet wearers, bad news for those who still believe that helmets actually cause problems for riders. Right, that is it for today. Thank you very much for looking in. Once again, as I mentioned, this is a recorded show due to the fact that I'm headed off to a classic motorcycle event up in Ely in a few minutes. So thank you once more for watching. Do drop me a line if you've got any comments. I will get back to you at the end of the show if I possibly can. And if you are heading out on this gorgeous day on your bike, do stay shiny side up. Thanks for looking in.